Hi, everybody, and welcome to Lovefraud Live. My new book is called Senior Sociopaths: How to Recognize and Escape Lifelong Abusers. It's based on more than 2,000 surveys completed by Lovefraud readers. The stories that my readers wrote about disordered men and women are equally awful. I'm Donna Andersen, author of Lovefraud.com, and tonight I'm going to compare male and female senior sociopaths. At the end of this presentation, I'll answer your questions. To join the chat or ask a question, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you're a frequent viewer of my show, you know that both men and women can be sociopaths. In my new book, I show that as they get older, both male and female sociopaths continue to be destructive to the people around them. One of my survey respondents wrote that as her disordered ex-husband got older, his narcissistic behavior pattern intensified. He was cruel, a pathological liar, and never apologized. He engaged in projection, triangulation, and gaslighting. She said that as she started emotionally disengaging, her husband got much worse. Another woman wrote that her disordered elderly mother never changed. She wrote that the woman exploits, lies, throws tantrums, rages, abandons, pouts, defames, threatens, and would still be physically violent if she had the physical strength. It's critical for you to understand that sociopaths can be found in all demographic groups: male, female, rich, poor, all races, all religions, all education levels. Yes, there are more men than women diagnosed with antisocial or psychopathic personality disorders. Generally, experts estimate that the ratio of males to females with these disorders is about 3-to-1. But when women have the disorders, like the men, they keep up their abusive behavior for their entire lives. In the Lovefraud Senior Sociopath Survey, respondents filled out questionnaires about people they knew who were over age 50 and who they believed were disordered. A total of 2,119 people responded to the survey. 89% of the respondents were female and 11% were male. The disordered people they described, who I refer to as index individuals, were 76% male and 24% female. Now, this is almost exactly a 3-to-1 ratio. So the survey reflects the estimated proportions of antisocial men and women in the population. What did it show? Both male and female senior sociopaths are abusive, although the abuse could take different forms. My colleagues and I documented this in a scientific paper. I was the lead author, and I worked with colleagues from the University of Otago in New Zealand. First, we analyzed the personality trait data reported by the survey respondents to see if the index individuals did indeed have antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. Well, as a group, they definitely showed high levels of disorder. Then, my colleagues organized the data into specific categories to estimate the harm endured by the survey respondents. We came up with 6 categories of harm. The first was negative characteristics of the relationship. This meant that the sociopaths were dishonest, insincere, unempathetic, or engaged in other manipulative behaviors. The second category was maltreatment of dependent children. As parents, the sociopaths were indifferent, neglectful, or abandoned the kids. The third category was rule-oriented harmful behavior in the workplace. This meant that on the job, the sociopaths were untrustworthy and did things like steal from the company or violate policy. The fourth category was person-oriented harmful behavior in the workplace. Now, this meant that the sociopaths blamed their coworkers, caused turmoil, or bullied other people in the workplace. The next category was emotional and physical harm to the respondent. The sociopaths engaged in behavior that caused physical injury or caused stress, illness, or PTSD. Material and financial harm to the respondent was the last category. The sociopaths were financially abusive, for example, causing respondents to lose their home or job or filing lawsuits against them. For more details on these categories of harm, you can read the actual scientific study. There's a link in the window below this video. After developing the categories, my colleagues analyzed the data to see if there were differences in the harm perpetrated by male and female sociopaths. Here's what we found. Men were reported to exhibit significantly more harmful negative relationship characteristics than women. The next thing we found was that men caused moderately more emotional and physical harm than women. Then, men caused somewhat more material and financial harm than women. And no significant gender difference was found among the men and women in the other areas of harm, which were rule or person-oriented harmful behavior in the workplace and maltreatment of dependent children. I made this last point in my video last week about sociopaths as parents. A total of 357 survey respondents wrote about their parents or step-parents. 196 described their mothers or stepmothers, and 120 described fathers or stepfathers. I was shocked to discover that the men and women were equally cruel, callous, and manipulative to their children. There were no significant differences in the levels or types of abuse inflicted by male or female parents. Now, plenty of people wrote about the manipulation they endured because of their disordered parents. This manipulation often led them to making bad choices for romantic partners in their own lives. In regards to romantic relationships, I also wanted to see if there were differences in the harm perpetrated by male and female senior sociopaths. A total of 681 survey respondents married these individuals. 130 married while young, like in their teens or 20s, and the others married them later in life. In the survey, I asked, was the individual, while over age 50, abusive toward you in any of the following ways? Respondents could select all the types of abuse that they experienced: emotional, psychological, financial, physical, or sexual. The question was answered by 365 women and 26 men. Here's what the respondents who married the senior sociopaths reported. 96% of women and 92% of men experienced emotional abuse. 90% of women and 100% of men experienced psychological abuse. 74% of women and 68% of men experienced financial abuse. 41% of women and 32% of men experienced physical abuse. And finally, 40% of women and 32% of men experienced sexual abuse. As you can see, the levels of abuse from their male and female spouses was almost the same. The bottom line is this: it doesn't matter if you are dealing with male or female senior sociopaths. They are all abusive, and none of them are likely to change. The best thing you can do is extricate yourself from the involvement. Okay, so sociopath survivor says, I believe that women are much more frequently diagnosed as borderline and or histrionic, like Amber Heard was, when in reality they are narcissists. And yeah, that's what you would consider a known phenomenon in the field. I didn't discuss a whole lot about borderline personality disorder tonight, although when I talk about sociopaths, I include all the cluster B personality disorders, which are antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, and histrionic. About 75% of the people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder are, in fact, women. It's quite possible that many of them are either narcissistic or antisocial rather than borderline, simply because many clinicians don't want to diagnose women as being antisocial or narcissistic. So consequently, they say that they're borderline when this may or may not be true. The category of histrionic personality disorder is very small. So there's so few people in there, and I'm not really sure what the breakout is between men and women. But anyway, back to the borderlines, although many more, as I said, are women, or women are diagnosed as borderline, there are men who have borderline personality disorder, and there's a book by Dr. Dutton is his name. It's called The Batterer. And this is a really interesting book because what he did was he spent a lot of time researching men who batter their wives. And one of the things that he did was he categorized the 3 types of batterers. And one of them is the cyclical batterer, and that's the type you hear about with the domestic violence wheel, where you have a pattern where there's relatively peaceful coexistence, and then the tension builds, and then it blows up, and then the batterer apologizes, and then the cycle keeps going around and around and around. So that's one of the groups. He also identified psychopathic wife abusers, and these were just cold. These people were brutal to their wives. And one of the significant characteristics of men who have that disorder is that the angrier they get, the calmer they get. I mean, it's really frightening. They just really get very, very calm. And then the third group was, he kind of figured out that they could be borderline personality disorders. So he found that some of the men, probably in the cyclical group, had borderline personality disorder. And so what that means is that it's quite possible, at least for a man with borderline personality disorder, to be violent. I feel bad for the women because most of them have been sexually abused while young, and this has a lot to do with this disorder developing. The good news, if you could call it that, related to borderline personality disorder is that some recovery is possible with that, as opposed to antisocial and narcissistic, where they're basically not going to change. But it's important to recognize that in any event, it's important to recognize that both men and women can be disordered, and we need to be aware of that. I mean, we can't let our ideas of how people should be, or ideas about how women should behave or how men should behave, get in the way of what is actually going on, because sometimes we have to believe our eyes and see what it is. So, okay. All right. Well, one of the things that I also could mention on this topic is, obviously, most of my data for the survey was provided by people who were in romantic relationships with the disordered individuals. And it was like, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe 70% or something like that of the people who contributed to the survey discussed their romantic partners. So it's worth a recap, I suppose, of the warning signs that you could be involved with a sociopath, which I wrote about in one of my earlier books called Red Flags of Love Fraud, 10 Signs You're Dating a Sociopath. And a few of the top warning signs were, number one is charisma and charm. People who have these personality disorders tend to be very exciting and always know what to say, never miss a beat. And I can tell you that it applies to both men and women. Another key trait is, or behavior, is the love bombing. People who have these personality disorders frequently shower you with attention and appreciation, and they want to be with you all the time, and they just are really pouring it on really thick. And another key characteristics is sexual magnetism. And one of the things, of course, is that all of these traits sound like a wonderful date. I mean, who wouldn't want to be involved with someone like this? And I can tell you that both men and women have told me that this is what they experience when they were in the seduction cycle, when the sociopath was focused on reeling them in. So it's important to know some of the warning signs that don't sound like your dream date. For example, all sociopaths lie, although one of the problems with lying is that you don't know that they're lying until maybe after the fact. So here's one characteristic or two that you would see right away that should, make you pause a bit. One is that sociopaths tend to blame other people for everything that goes wrong in their lives. And this is something that you will see, like, probably right from the beginning. And another is that they engage in the pity play. They try to make you feel sorry for them. So if you start to see these behaviors, you should be careful, because it could be a warning sign that somebody has a personality disorder. Okay. So Chanel is saying, I was married and took care of a man that was 20 years older than me. He never worked and never left my side. He controlled what I wore, how I looked, and who I spoke to. I resent myself for this. Well, yes, what you are describing is classical sociopathic controlling behavior. That's what they do. But I hope that you can stop resenting, because you need to understand that these relationships are insidious, in that, it starts out wonderful. I imagine it did. I mean, that's usually the case, or at least it starts out pretty good. And they tell you how much they love you and how wonderful you are and that you make such a great team and everything like that. And it creeps up on you as far as being abused and being taken advantage of. It obviously, it doesn't happen on the first date, because you would never go on a second date. So what they do is that they hook you emotionally, and once they figure out that you are hooked, that's when they start the controlling behavior. So, and you, in the meantime, you're in this because you think you have an authentic relationship. You think the two of you are working towards a happy, loving future. And you don't want to give that up. You don't realize that the whole thing is a game on the other person's part. So the bottom line is, don't go hard on yourself. I mean, these people are good. And if this guy was 20 years older than you, he's been doing it all his life. And that's the thing about senior sociopaths. They get very good. They've been doing it all their lives. They figure out what works and exactly how to manipulate somebody. So that's why it's important to understand that they're out there. Well, I see that Sociopath Survivor has read my Lovefraud book. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. It really is quite the story. The full title, of course, is Lovefraud: How Marriage to a Sociopath Fulfilled My Spiritual Plan. So it reads like a cross between a true crime novel and a spiritual journey. And my ex-husband was a senior sociopath when I married him, although I didn't know that. And he also lied about his age. I mean, I was 40 when I met him. He said he was 49. But then he told me that he couldn't bear to lie to me, and he had to admit that he was really 51. Well, actually, he was 55. And then, once I divorced him, he went on to scamming even more women. So this guy never stopped. He was definitely active the entire time, probably until he passed, which was like last year. So, okay, everybody. Well, I thank you so much for joining me tonight. Again, the main message is that, yes, there are male and female senior sociopaths, and you need to understand what the warning signs are because they can both put you through the ringer. So, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Good night.